Without further ado, I will give the floor first to Ghada, I think, right? From the World Health Organization, who will tell us about the studies that they have conducted. So you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Juan Carlos. Thank you for inviting me to this event. I'm very happy and very honored to be in the European Parliament to present the report that my team and I in WHO prepared on AI interpretation. It was a bit scary when we launched the study because we weren't sure what we were going to find. We had actually started by doing some a posteriori assessments of AI interpretation that had been done on the initiative of meeting organizers in WHO. And we realized that the results or the output of that AI interpretation was, and I use the word carefully, shameful. I don't know if this works. Yeah. You can see here some examples of gross errors that we saw from the very first AI interpretation assessments that we did. And I felt that I simply could not accept, as WHO chief interpreter, to have WHO meetings interpreted in a way that could not possibly enhance communication, and interpretation is meant, yeah, that's what happens. People laugh. Yeah, so interpretation is meant to enhance communication, and this did not. On the contrary, it exposed the organization and the speakers at those events to ridicule. And so we felt that it was important to offer the organization an assessment that was more substantial and more substantiated than simply collecting these kinds of gross errors. We hired an intern, an interpreter herself, a young interpreter, and we started first with a market study to see what was available. And we quickly saw that what platforms claimed to be AI interpretation tools, in fact, only provided parts of the cascade that is used in AI interpretation. So in case you're not aware, usually AI interpretation is based on 3 steps: speech to text, or transcription, text to text, machine translation, and then text to speech, vocalization. And a lot of these platforms claim they provide AI interpretation, but only did 1 or 2 of these 3 parts. Do you want me to press? So we excluded those platforms from the assessment we're going to do, and then we also excluded platforms that did not cover the 6 WHO languages: Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. And we also excluded platforms that had already been tested by other international organizations. Basically, we ended up with Wordly, which had been declared by one of the major language consultants, NIMD, as the best. And Wordly were kind enough to accept to be tested under our own conditions without any conditions on their side. So then the question was, what are we testing? We decided to go for speeches from the World Health Assembly, our biggest meeting of the year, which had public speeches that were recorded, so it was easy to find. And we decided to take 3 speeches in Arabic, Chinese, English, French, and Russian, and Spanish, interpret them into all other 5 languages, and have a full assessment of all these interpretations. And we developed speech selection criteria. We felt it was important to include in these speeches things like accents, numbers, acronyms, figures of speech, cultural references, speed of the speaker. And we tried to choose also difficulties that would bring out the kind of difficulties that the AI had trouble with in either speech-to-text, machine translation, or text-to-speech. Then we needed to decide what quality assessment criteria we would use. We decided to base our assessment on the UN competitive exam assessment criteria, but we adapted them because we felt that after listening initially to the output of Wordly AI interpretation, that the delivery was so poor and the style or expression was so poor, we didn't want to focus on that. We wanted to really focus on the content because it is, after all, the most important thing. And we left that aside, trying to be as objective as possible, but only took delivery and expression into account where it affected the content. We set the passing grade at 75%, which I think is a reasonable mark for an interpreter. We then created a template with a transcription of the original and a transcription of the output to make it easier to grade, and then a part where the grader put comments and the grade for each segment. But we didn't rely on the transcription. We relied always on the audio, but it was more helpful to have the transcription also available. And for speeches where none of the graders knew both the source and the target languages, like Chinese to Arabic, we used an English translation as relay, as you can see on the slide. Now, in addition to giving a grade based on the content, we asked the graders to identify and keep score of the number of reputational risks in each interpretation. This is not something that is usually done in a competitive exam at the UN or in the institutions, but with AI, it was very important. And we considered that reputational risks related to elements in the interpretation that could threaten the values, the image, or the identity of WHO, or of the speaker and their country, or that could ridicule the speaker, that could have political or diplomatic fallout, or that could significantly undermine the smooth functioning of the meeting. And we felt that a single reputational risk would be eliminatory. So, to be honest, this is the first time I prepare a slideshow. And clearly, you can see I didn't do it very well because the last part is missing, so sorry about that. So the results of the study were put together in scoring tables. I'll move to the next one, but just to give you an idea, we did for each country, into each language, the score and the number of reputational risks, and averaged it out. In this slide, maybe you can see, but it's very small. Anyway, basically, the results were surprisingly low for all languages. They ranged from a mere 5% to 83%. There was one score only that was above 75, so one passing interpretation out of 90. But even that interpretation still had a reputational risk, so it didn't pass. And the number of reputational risks per interpretation ranged from 1 to 9. The overall average was 45%, with interpretation into English at 51%, faring better than other languages, but not by a huge margin, which surprised us. What was even more interesting was that interpretation into English had the highest total number of reputational risks, at 46 overall. Interpretation into Chinese had at 40% the lowest average grade, not surprising. Interpretation from English was also the highest graded at 54%. Unexpectedly, French as a source language had the lowest average at 36%. But after much reflection and analysis of the various speeches and grades, we felt it was probably due to one particularly difficult speech by the Democratic Republic of Congo, which had a lot of regionalisms and which had a very low grade into all languages. Into Chinese, it was just 5%. So these grades are obviously not great, right? I mean, if you make a speech and half of it is not there, you're not very happy. But it's important to note that large chunks of the interpretations were correct and were good. So we're not saying that AI interpretation had only bad things to offer. Overall, 54%, right, was correct. But it's not acceptable for any serious attempt at multilingual communication in an international conference. The test clearly showed a number of systemic challenges in AI interpretation, and I'd like to go over some of them with you. The first general issue was language identification, or what is called code switching. So in WHO, in a lot of our meetings, we have 6 languages. Delegates take the floor, like here, in whatever language they pick to use out of the 6. And AI took time to get the language, time in the sense of 1 or 2 sentences in general. And while it was working on picking up the language, it could, for instance, interpret English into English inaccurately, and it often gave out nonsensical phrases. And this was where it was the worst. Once it picked up the language, it got a bit better. More specific difficulties now. We were quite surprised to see how well it managed with speed. I think overall it was able to get more details than a human interpreter would get in terms of very, very speedy delivery. However, the problem with that is that it took time in the beginning of the speech to sort of latch onto the speech and get the right speed. And then at the end, it stopped with the speaker and so missed out the last few sentences, or sometimes 1, 2, or 3 sentences, which, is not great. The lag was also quite significant, went up, we counted, to over 32 seconds to start the interpretation, whereas we interpreters generally have about 5 seconds as a maximum. This is perturbing for a delegate who's following a speech. Another issue that AI interpretation had was proper nouns. Yes, for us also, proper nouns are difficult. But for instance, in names of countries, there are clearly mistakes that we would not do as interpreters. Human interpreters usually, if they can't hear a proper noun properly, they'll try to skip it or use the title of the person rather than the name. Basically, find ways around it. AI always goes for it confidently, not always correctly. So some of very distinct examples of proper nouns that were not correctly interpreted. Brunei Dar es Salaam came out as the brunette Russell. Greece as Chris. Haiti as Heidi, and so on. Also for proper nouns, names of people. So the WHO regional director for Africa was a certain Dr. Moeti, who was misgendered as a man in languages that gender nouns. And this was a clear indication of gender bias. We saw that persons of authority were immediately gendered as male, you guessed. In another instance, Dr. Moeti was interpreted into Arabic as our African. Yes, it's quite shocking and would be very offensive. In this particular case, we felt it was probably a speech-to-text issue in the way that it was transcribed. Even more seriously, in one speech by Spain where Hamas was mentioned in the context of the 7th of October attacks, it came out in Arabic as an incomprehensible afar. Afar means nothing in Arabic. It's not even close to Hamas. Even worse, in the transcription, it came out as the US. Yeah. It's interesting to note that the AI transcription didn't correspond to the AI interpretation, the oral interpretation output. The thing is that AI interpretation, I don't know if any of you have tried it, when it's transcribed, it just keeps autocorrecting. It changes all the time. And there isn't enough time in AI interpretation to have as many corrections. This doesn't mean that the transcription was always better. It wasn't. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. So it's a bit of a mystery to me. Another major issue was segmentation that was incorrect. So the interpretation would start with the first sentence and then not quite pick up when the sentence added, and either add a part of the second sentence to it or take part of the last phrase of the sentence and put it on the second sentence. And I'll give you an example here where the original was le coût humain et social considérable, etc. N'a pas suffisamment retenu l'attention comme problème de santé publique pour nous forcer à changer de comportement. And then in the next sentence, in that sentence into English, and you'll see that the English interpretation is really not bad. The considerable human and social costs of these scourges has not received sufficient attention. Okay, tense is perhaps not perfect. To force us to change our behavior, the Haitian people have asked me to convey this message to you. And you can see how significant this faulty segmentation has as an impact on the meaning. And this issue of faulty segmentation could be found in all the speeches. Surprisingly, figures were a major stumbling block. You would think that AI would have an easier time than us human interpreters, but no. Yes, some came out correctly. Many didn't. They were either mistranscribed and then mispronounced, or transcribed correctly and then pronounced strangely, especially when a lot of zeros were involved. So it would say something like, in the year 2009. I mean, when you listen to it, you don't quite understand. And sometimes an extra zero was added. This is one of what they call hallucinations that is incomprehensible, but it happens quite often. I'm going to skip some because I'm scared I'm going to talk too much. Technical terms were problematic. Transmission of polio, we're the WHO, so there's a lot of talk about diseases. Transmission of polio was interpreted from Arabic as transportation of polio because it's the same word in Arabic. In a statement in French, hepatitis became Ebola in Arabic. From Chinese, stratified health was interpreted into all the other languages as airplane health. Yeah. Like I said, delivery was problematic. It was much better than what we had seen in the year before and in other platforms. It was in earlier assessments that we had done, there was a huge acceleration and then a long break. This was not what we saw in Wordly. It was much better paced, but it was very monotonous. And so there was no emphasis, there was no going up and down as a human voice is modulated. And I feel it would be very difficult for a listener to follow a whole meeting for 3 hours, even more than 3-4 minutes. It's hard to just keep concentrating on it. But also there were issues with pronunciation, particularly in Arabic and Russian. In Arabic, wrong vowels on the letters, changed the meaning, like changed verbs from passive voice to active voice or vice versa. In Russian, the wrong syllable was emphasized, making understanding more difficult. Our basic conclusion is that AI interpretation tools at this stage are still at an experimental stage. They cannot be used in an international WHO meeting. We felt the only possible use for us in WHO was in internal meetings where there would be no reputational risk. And our recommendation was that if it is used to somehow facilitate communication and reduce cost, it should be in a bilingual internal meeting, not more than 2 languages, and with a staff member who speaks both languages to sort of clarify things when they get very confusing. And WHO issued last year guidance on the use of AI, and it included a section on AI interpretation and where and how it can be used and where it should not be used. And the basic principle underpinning this guidance is that AI cannot come out of the organization. Anything produced with AI needs to be first under human review. And this is the problem with simultaneous interpretation. It is simultaneous. There's no time for human review. And I don't see the possibility, at least with the technology that we have now, in solving that problem. So this was basically our study. It was limited, and I think this is important to say, to the assessment of the quality of AI interpretation. We didn't look at IT security, confidentiality, a lot of other issues that are really significant. The dependence on the quasi-monopoly of AI sources, the political issues regarding the source of AI. Will the Chinese delegation accept AI interpretation based on American-sourced AI, and so on? Legal accountability, who is held responsible? The inherent bias, do we want to not only have inherent bias, but also promote inherent bias by having AI interpretation with this bias in it? And then there's hidden costs. Yes, the average cost today of an AI interpretation service for a 3-hour meeting is less expensive than even for a bilingual meeting for interpreters. But once AI interpretation becomes more, if it does, more used, and there are less interpreters around because there isn't enough of a market for them, and there's a complete reliance or semi-complete reliance on AI interpretation, won't the costs go up? I mean, this is how these platforms work, right? They first give you services for free, then at a low cost, and then once you're totally reliant on them, the costs are very likely to go up. So there's a lot of long-term thinking, I feel, that is important to have on AI, not just the quality of interpretation. And then just one other very, very important issue, I think, today is the carbon footprint of AI, including in interpretation. Just one statistic, a Cornell University study estimates that global AI could account for 6.6 billion cubic meters use of water by 2027, which is equivalent to 2/3 of England's annual consumption, for instance. These are really important elements that I don't have the expertise and the competence to look at, but that need to be considered very seriously before taking decisions on the use of AI interpretation. Thank you.